Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome our television audience to our program tonight. For their benefit, this is the 1991 John Birch Society birthday banquet coming to you from Airlie in Warrenton, Virginia. We are celebrating the 3rd birthday of the John Birch Society, and we are happy to have everyone here tonight. At this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Jim Hutt from Warrenton to introduce our guest speaker. Jim.
I am indeed honored to be able to introduce our speaker. John F. McManus was born in Brooklyn, raised in Brooklyn, and I really don't hold that against him being a Yankee. He graduated from Holy Cross College in Massachusetts as a major in physics, which to me says a lot for the man's intelligence, because I figure anybody who can get through physics must be pretty smart. He went into the Marine Corps for 3 years, and then after that worked for 6 years as an electronics engineer. He became a John Birch Society coordinator and was asked to serve on the staff at headquarters in 1968. He became Director of Public Relations for the John Birch Society and Chief Spokesman. In June of this year, the Council appointed Mr. McManus President of the John Birch Society. Mr. McManus and I share one thing, one conviction, and that is that we will win this struggle with God's help. And when asked what he would do when victory was certain, he said that he would read all of those books that Mr. Welch thought he had read. And I can understand this because it's hard enough to keep abreast of current affairs without going back and reading these books that we all should have read. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, who will speak on the subject to restore the American dream, President John F. McManus.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Hutt, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your welcome. Like the cow said to the Vermont farmer on a winter morning, thank you for a warm hand on a cold day. All of those kind words remind me of the man who was one time glowingly introduced as one of the most gifted businessmen in the entire nation, evidenced by the fact that he had made millions of dollars in California oil. And when he rose to speak, he was a bit embarrassed. He appreciated the kind remarks, but it wasn't oil, he said, it was coal. And it wasn't in California, it was in Pennsylvania. And it wasn't millions, it was thousands. And it wasn't he, it was his brother. And he didn't make it, he lost it. So he's now a candidate for Congress. My title here this evening, assigned to me by my good friend, our host, Mason Gardner, is To Restore the American Dream. We are going to talk about a dream. And my job, therefore, is to get everyone ready for that dream. In other words, I'm here to put you to sleep. Now, one easy way to reach that goal is to present you with an array of statistics. Well, I'm not going to do that. I learned a lesson a few years ago when I told an audience that I wasn't going to bore them with a lot of statistics, and a fellow in the front row said that I didn't need the statistics, I was boring without them. On his last trip to America, Pope John Paul II caused a dutiful policeman to think that he was dreaming. The Pope, as you may know, enjoyed a robust youth and still delights in the everyday pleasures of life whenever he can. On his last trip to America, he was met at the airport by a chauffeured limousine and the driver to be taken to a very important meeting. Well, the Pope took one look at that beautiful automobile, something he'd always dreamed about getting behind the wheel of, and he struck up a conversation with the driver. It went something like this. He said, you know, I've always wanted to drive one of these limos, and I'm sure you'd enjoy a break in your routine, so why don't I drive, and you can take my place in the back, and you can relax, and you can enjoy the ride, and no one will know the difference. The driver protested, but the Pope was pretty persuasive. And after all, he carries a lot of weight, especially if you're a Catholic limo driver. So into the back went the driver, and into the driver's seat went the Pope. He even borrowed the chauffeur's little cap, and off they went. And the Pope was absolutely amazed at the performance of the vehicle. Pretty soon he had it up to 70 miles an hour, then 80, then 90 miles an hour, and pretty soon the police saw the car whiz by and set out in hot pursuit. Now, more than likely you know the routine: the police, the siren, the blinking lights, the need for the speeding vehicle to pull over, and the Pope did pull over. All right, now try to picture this. All right. One policeman approached the auto. His partner stayed in the police car by the radio. In a few minutes, the first cop returns with a bewildered look on his face. And he says, we can't give a ticket. We just can't. This guy's too important. He has to be the most important man in the whole world. Well, his partner says, well, who is he? And the first policeman says, I don't know who he is, but he's so big, he's got the Pope for a chauffeur. Now imagine his dream that night. Well, what about restoring the American dream? What is the American dream? We can't work to restore something if we don't have a vision of what it is we want to restore. To put it very succinctly, the American dream is to be free of the unnecessary shackles of government. This is why millions came to our country. This is why millions still come here, to be free of government coercion. But as taxes and regulations and controls and bureaucracy grow daily in this nation, the American dream is fading. It's time to bring it back. It's time to restore it. And we had better do so soon before it is faded so greatly that it can't be recognized and can't be restored. Think about the history of this great country. She was brought into the world in 1776 by individuals who had fled from too much government in Europe. She had to fight for her independence as an infant and had to suffer growing pains just like a child progressing toward adulthood. Before she flowered, she endured several wars, a few insurrections, and even a governmental crisis, out of which came the United States Constitution, the finest system of government ever devised by man. By the time this nation was 100 years old, still a youngster in the life of a nation, she had become the refuge of the world's tired and hungry and poor, who left everything in the old world and came here yearning to be free. They came for opportunity, for a chance to realize the age-old dream of mankind, to be out from under government coercion, to be able to keep the fruits of one's labor, to build, to produce, and even to pray without worrying about breaking some ordinance. Beyond those who came to America, there were countless millions more throughout the globe who took comfort and found hope in knowing that such a place as America existed, a place where men had bound government down to its proper role and not themselves been shackled by a government run amok. What made America great isn't any mystery. What set it apart from other nations and other lands isn't a secret. It wasn't natural resources. There are equal or greater natural resources in all of the inhabited continents. America's people weren't the source of her greatness either. The people who transformed a backward wilderness into a marvel of productivity came here with talents they already possessed, but there was something here that enabled them to do more in their new surroundings than they had been able to accomplish in the lands that they had left. Was it government's wisdom, or government's programs, or government's benevolence that spurred our nation to the heights that it reached? No, not at all. It wasn't what government did that made the difference. It was what government was prevented from doing that made the difference. The key to America's greatness is freedom for the individual. Freedom to work, to produce, to succeed, and especially to keep the fruits of one's labor. Here a person is even possessed of the freedom to fail and the freedom to start over again. As much as the source of America's greatness has always been the freedom to do this or that, as long as we continue to respect the rights of others, the wonder of America is that her people were free from the stifling and meddlesome control of government. The world has recently been given a good look at the horrifying fruits of government controls. We see it daily in our newspapers. As the Soviet Union disintegrates, the politicians and the pundits are discovering that the communist system, which is socialism, is a failure. Listen to me, say these self-promoting experts. I'm delighted to inform you that communism is a failure. The people are in want, the shelves are bare, and the communists themselves are abandoning the system. One quick response to that is to suggest that the American people would be far better off listening to someone who's been telling them that the communist system has always been a failure. Why place faith in someone who wasn't smart enough to see the failure until it smacked him right in the face? And why listen to someone who thinks that when a communist becomes a socialist, that he's really made a significant change? You know, there are still some Marxist college professors who refuse to believe that the socialist system has failed. They'll go to any lengths to defend it. Well, what about the bare shelves, said an angry student to one of these die-hard Marxists. And the professor shot back and he said, the problem is not what you perceive. The difficulty is the efficiency of those who built too many shelves. And the problem here in our nation is that we are being steadily led into the same socialistic system that has kept the peoples of scores of nations in slavery over the past several decades. For the 33 years of our existence, the John Birch Society has opposed communism. We have become known as an anti-communist organization. And it's this label that has prompted many Americans, including numerous radio talk show hosts and media representatives and people that I meet in the course of my duties, to ask a question. And they say, now that communism is dead, why is the John Birch Society still in business? And some of them don't ask it snidely, they just don't know any better. Of course, some of them do ask it snidely. We respond positively to the anti-communist label, and we should. For communism is one of the greatest blots ever to darken the pages of mankind's history. The murder of well over 100 million human beings during the 20th century, all of them victimized by communist savagery outside of war. That constitutes only one of many reasons why anyone should be proud to be known as an anti-communist. Other characteristics of this system include totalitarian rule, suppression of God-given freedoms, denial of property rights, and the elevation of lying, cheating, and double-dealing to a virtual art form. Shouldn't everyone be anti-communist? Even if there were no nations suffering under communism, shouldn't you still be anti-communist? And isn't it a sad commentary on our times that so many of our leaders, even in our own government, are not anti-communist and don't want to be known as anti-communist. Well, despite a widespread perception to the contrary, created mainly by our government and the mass media, and repeated by the average radio talk show host and newspaper reporter, communism is not dead. The world's most popular nation, China, remains ruled by communist thugs, and so too do smaller nations. Cuba, North Korea, and Vietnam still suffer under the heel of communist tyrants. But even if no nations were shackled by communism, communism should be understood and opposed so that its deadly force might never again infect mankind. Now, beyond proper opposition to communism, our John Birch Society has always preferred to stress a more positive and a more important goal. Specifically, while never relaxing our abhorrence to communism, we are more motivated by a desire for Americanism. That admirable social arrangement summed up as less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. For Birchers, this positive promise of what can be built in an atmosphere of real Americanism motivates us as much or more than does the negative fear of what must be exposed and cast aside. We are for the system given us by the wise and far-seeing men who founded this nation. We are for the limitations upon government written into the U.S. Constitution. We are for free enterprise and all of the productivity that it brings. We are for honesty, integrity, self-reliance, and many other virtues that are always found in the best of men. And because we are for all of these traits of what we call Americanism, we have always opposed its direct opposite, communism, in which none of what we are for is present, and everything we oppose is enshrined. So therefore, one quick response to those who deliberately or maliciously or mistakenly wonder why the John Birch Society is still in business now that communism is dead, they say. One quick response is that Americanism is dying, and it has always been our purpose not only to keep it alive, but to restore it to good health. We are hardly less needed. Indeed, our perspective is needed more every single day. But another response to those who might wonder about the continuing existence of anti-communism in the Birch Society is that communism simply isn't dead. It's wrong to say now that communism is dead, why are you still in business? A third response is that a communist has never been anything but a socialist in a hurry. And I want you to remember that. It's a good line. Like a lot of people, I guess, I've never met a good line I wouldn't borrow. So I want you to borrow that. A communist has never been anything but a socialist in a hurry. And when communism is replaced by socialism, there is no reason whatsoever for anyone who loves liberty to raise the victory flag. The leaders throughout Eastern Europe, the leaders in the Soviet Union, what's left of it, the new leader in the Ukraine, the new leaders in the Baltic countries, they're all socialists. But the more complete response to the question of why is the John Birch Society still in business is that whenever we were referring to communism, we always had in mind the modern manifestation of a powerful conspiracy whose megalomaniacal leaders mean to rule the world. To accomplish their diabolical goal, these arch criminals have created and used such economic and political systems as communism, or socialism, or Nazism, or fascism, or a lot of other unsavory isms. They mean, quite simply, to create total power for themselves over the whole human race. And opposition to this conspiracy is a major task we have set for ourselves. No one, except possibly a few near-mindless college professors, ever believed that the economic plan known as communism possessed any redeeming qualities to benefit mankind. But millions who identified with it during the past 2 centuries denied their instincts as human beings and carried out its foul program because doing so had become the route to personal and political power. But the communist system has never been anything more than a tool of a gigantic conspiracy whose aim is to gain power over the whole human race. And so we must focus on that conspiracy, not on one of its arms. Communism has never been more than one of the conspiracy's tool, but it's not been its only tool. If we consider communism in the academic sense, it's nothing more than enforced socialism. The application of physical and psychological restraints and brutality to establish economic control of the people by government. If instead of using physical and psychological brutality and restraints, other conspirators called socialists cajole the people into choosing this system themselves, this economic slavery, they have, in a more patient way, arrived at the very same goal sought by the communists. Once socialists have economically enslaved the people, they will then resort to physical and psychological brutality to maintain it. Now, that's a very key thing. The communists use force and brutality to establish it and to keep it in place. The socialists persuade people to accept it themselves, and once it's in place, then they use brutality and force to keep it in place. Ultimately, they are the same thing, but there are 2 different routes to gaining the same goal. Famed British playwright George Bernard Shaw was a determined socialist who explicitly favored violence. In his own writings, a thing he wrote called The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism, he explained, and this is a quote, "I also made it clear that socialism means equality of income or nothing, and that under socialism you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed, whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered," said Shaw, "that you had not the character and industry enough to be worth all of this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner. But whilst you were permitted to live, you would have to live well." End of quote. And that's a socialist, ladies and gentlemen. He never was a communist. He certainly was a socialist, and very proud of the fact that he was a socialist. A government gains economic control of the people, which is the essence of socialism, through an accumulation of taxation, regulations, controls, and bureaucracy. This is how socialists in our own government, including many senators and representatives who probably wouldn't know what you meant if you labeled them socialists, these men are enslaving the American people. We are now facing a situation where we have annual deficits running $300 billion or close to it. Maybe this year it will even be worse than $300 billion. And yet the United States government still gives away foreign aid. Now you take that pair of facts to a 4th grader and you explain to them that the government is in deficit by $300 billion on an annual basis and that they still give away foreign aid, and the 4th grader would say to you there's something wrong. I sometimes think we might be better if we had 4th graders in Congress. There's a congressman named Lee Hamilton from Indiana. He's a respected member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And he said recently that because of the economic ills in our nation, quote, I find myself defending foreign aid a lot more than I have for a long time. In other words, he still wants foreign aid. He still thinks it's a worthwhile thing for our country going $300 billion in debt year after year to be giving away money. And to whom do we give it? We give it to socialist governments, ladies and gentlemen. Socialist governments elsewhere in the country, in the world. And all of this plunge into socialism here in America, taxation, regulations, controls, and bureaucracy, all of it is being accomplished while its perpetrators pay lip service to legality. In other words, the various steps being taken to establish socialism here in our nation are being taken with legislative acts, court decisions, and the use of what are considered proper government powers at the executive level. And support for what they are doing is generated by federal programs that keep the people's support with the people's own dollars. Finding authorization in the United States Constitution for any of the many layers of socialist takeover, of course, is impossible. The Constitution does not allow for a vast number of present federal intrusions into the private sector and into your wallet or your purse. But how many Americans understand enough of their heritage to protest their ongoing enslavement on constitutional grounds? Or how many know enough to point out the lessons of history that teach the folly and the danger of a plunge into socialistic control? Or how many can protest what is being done on purely moral grounds, or on economic grounds, or on the grounds of common sense? Not many. Without most Americans having the slightest idea of what is happening to them, all of us are being led away from freedom and into slavery. The widespread lack of knowledge proves the wisdom of the socialist plan to gain control of formal education, the media, much of religion, etc. And they have. Most of what the people need to know in order to stay free has been denied them. And many have also been talked out of their morality and common sense by appeals to greed and other base instincts. Now, before we go too far in describing the problems faced by those of us who are striving to remain free, let's stop to realize the tremendous advantages we have going for us and the tremendous disadvantages facing the conspirators and their many dupes and agents. To reach their goal, our enemies must hide the truth, circumvent the Constitution, suppress moral principles, keep the lessons of history hidden, discard sound economics, and overcome basic common sense. But on our side can be found the truth and morality and history's many lessons and the Constitution and economic principles and man's basic common sense. What an advantage! What an advantage we have! As we reach out to others to save both them and ourselves from the slavery intended by a conspiracy, we indeed have a lot going for us. I want to talk to you a little bit about the wisdom of a man named Robert Welch. Robert Welch founded the John Birch Society in December of 1958. He led it until March of 1983 when he stepped aside, and then he died less than 2 years later. The question that has come to Birchers everywhere in recent months presumes that the John Birch Society had no other purpose than opposition to communism. We who are members certainly know that's not so. Right from its birth, however, the Society took its stand for Americanism and against socialism. And Robert Welch, the man who finally formed the John Birch Society in 1958, had written as far back as the 1930s about what was happening to our country. He wrote an essay back in that period called "A Weight on My Shoulders," and in it he lamented, quote, "My country is being converted into a carbon copy of thousands of despotisms that have come before." And he wasn't talking about communism, he was talking about socialism or collectivism or the tendency of individuals to gain control over everyone by gaining control of government and leading them into economic slavery. During his two-day presentation at the Society's founding meeting in 1958, Robert Welch spent a considerable amount of time discussing what he termed the cancer of collectivism. He maintained that, quote, "the acceptance of socialism or any form of collectivism as a forward step or as a form of progress in man's sociological arrangements is completely absurd." How right he was. Over and over again, he made reference to the destructiveness of socialism, sometimes by name and sometimes by inference. In one remarkable passage, the Welsh wit showed itself as he condemned the way a government infected with socialism intrudes into the private sector and then uses the harm it has caused to create more power for itself. Here is how he put it. He said, "A government trying to step in and improve the workings of the free market is exactly like a man who takes a lighted lantern outdoors at noon of a bright June day to show you the sun. But a government's answer to any criticism as to the inadequacy of the lantern," he said, "is always to bring more lanterns, and then more lanterns, until eventually the smoke and the glare of the lanterns so seriously interfere with and shut off the light of the sun that everybody actually has to work mainly by lantern light." That's the way government operates. That's a very good way of putting it. For sweeping and telling conclusions, Robert Welch offered this: "The increasing quantity of government in all nations has constituted the greatest tragedy of the 20th century." And he especially focused in on the increase of government in this nation, and these were his words in 1958. It has gotten far worse, hasn't it? Later on, he said, "And the greatest enemy of man is and always has been government. And the larger and the more extensive that government, the greater the enemy." People who think that the John Birch Society was only opposed to communism don't know that right from the beginning, the enemy was too much government. And the greatest manifestation during that period and for many years of too much government was indeed communism. But let's never forget that even the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had as its goal socialism. And socialism is economic control of the people by government. It means taxation, controls, regulations, bureaucracy, and big brother government. And that's what we're getting in this country. Robert Welch at one time, after making it very clear that he never condoned dishonesty in the slightest degree, and I've never met a man who was more honest, he chose the following dramatic way to express his intense aversion to socialistic big government. He said this: I had rather have for America, and I am convinced America would be better off with, a government of 300,000 officials and agents, every single one of them a thief, than a government of 3 million agents, with every single one of them an honest, honorable public servant. For the first group, the thieves, the 300,000 thieves, would only steal from the American economic and political system. The second group, 3 million bureaucrats, would be bound in time to destroy it. What a way to make a point. Years later, Robert Welch pointed out that the goal of the conspirators in our midst is not sheer destruction of the American system, but the remolding of it into what he called a gigantic economic bureaucracy, which will become the framework through which routine control is exercised over every detail of the lives and actions of the American people. He continued, he said, you can now see that metamorphosis being insidiously carried out right before your eyes. And most of what is taking place can be more easily understood if the fundamental difference between a free enterprise economic system and a police state socialist system is recognized at once. He said this, he said the free enterprise system is based on the philosophy of abundance, with millions of salesmen always trying to move the too much. And the socialist system is based on a philosophy of scarcity, with millions of ration clerks always trying to divide the too little. That's powerful. And it certainly is apropos of our situation in America today. In the midst of a deep recession that is producing more ration clerks and fewer salesmen, the American people ought to listen to Robert Welch and to those of us who believe as he did and carry on the essential work he inaugurated. If not turned aside, the socialism that increasingly affects and infects America can only lead to a destruction of all freedom and the conversion of our nation into totalitarian police state. With the determined effort of our current president to reinvigorate, and it's his word, reinvigorate the United Nations, the prospect of foreign troops administering the planned police state is no wild surmise. I can't say it too often, my friends. Socialism is economic control. Economic control is slavery. In order to keep a population enslaved, all freedoms must be canceled. Freedom of speech or of the press cannot be tolerated in a completely socialist state. Should such a horror be established here, there will be controls put on religion, on the right to assemble, on the right to own a weapon, and no resistance to the all-powerful state will be permitted. This is the goal of those leading the drive to socialize America. Like the government agent shutting out the sun's light with one smoky lantern and then more smoky lanterns, swarms of government agents continue to create huge problems and then claim to address them by offering more government programs, meaning more government problems. If we don't reverse the process and do so soon, we shall indeed be slaves. Socialism is not a benign alternative to communism. Ultimately, it's the same deadly force, and its progress toward complete control of the United States ought to alarm and energize anyone who wants to be free. And so where are we? Where are we, the American people, in this situation? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we still have enough freedom to save the whole system. We don't have to lose this struggle. Far from that, we can win if we seize the opportunity to do so while there is still time. And believe me, there is time. The John Birch Society has the program. We have the tools. We have the energy. All we need is more willing hands and to put them to work. We don't have to face a situation where the only choices left to us are submission or suicidal confrontation. That is the situation that has faced millions and millions of people in our own time. It's the situation that still faces the people in China. Submission or suicidal confrontation. But we don't have to face that. Nor do we have to face a future where freedom is only a memory. And we certainly don't ever have to respond to a child who asks, at some future year, what it might have been like in America before the New World Order was established. Ladies and gentlemen, the enemy is a conspiracy. There are not that many conspirators. There are many individuals who go along to get along. If we could make the situation such that in order for them to get along and go along, they become hardcore constitutionalists, advocates of the free enterprise system, they would. And so our course is clear. Wake the town. Tell the people. The socialism that permeates our nation is a tool of a conspiracy. Both the tool and its wielders can be exposed and routed by diligent application of the program of the John Birch Society. And one of the best tools we have is our little trim bulletin. Our trim bulletin that gives the voting record of the congressman on economic issues. Did he vote for higher taxes and more government? And if so, he gets stars for all of these votes. Or did he vote for lower taxes and less government? He gets the stars. Higher taxes and more government, he gets the X's. And these are just two random congressmen. You can see that this one is a very appealing congressman, and this one is not so appealing. And ladies and gentlemen, we're not telling anybody to vote for this man or to vote against that man or to vote in any election. We're not telling you for whom you should vote. We're telling you simply what they are doing, not what they're saying, what they are doing. These little trim bulletins are available to anyone in the United States. You can get 100 of them, $8, Appleton, Wisconsin, John Birch Society, on your congressman. I suppose it's fitting that we bring this speech to a close by citing the words of a poet named O'Shaughnessy. He happens to be an Irishman, like meself, as they say in Ireland. He wrote about men who dream, and he called them the music makers. I learned of the existence of the poem, as did many of you in the John Birch Society, from reading Robert Welch's Blue Book of the John Birch Society. O'Shaughnessy was paying tribute to the people who would seize the opportunity and do it. It's a tribute to the very few who have the determination and the moxie to make history. Here's what he said. We are the music makers and we are the dreamers of dreams, wandering by lone sea breakers and sitting by desolate streams, world losers and world forsakers on whom the pale moon gleams. Yet we are the movers and shakers of the world, forever it seems. With wonderful, deathless ditties, we built the world's great cities, and out of a fabulous story, we fashion an empire's glory. One man with a dream at pleasure shall go forth and conquer a crown, and three with a song's new measure can trample an empire down. We, in the ages lying in the buried past of the earth, built Nineveh with our sighing, and Babel itself with our mirth, and o'erthrew them with prophesying to the old of the new world's worth. And his final line was, for each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth. Let's just consider that last line. For each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth. What's it going to be for us? What's it going to be for present-day Americans? Is it going to be the age of a dream that comes to birth? A rebirth, if you will? Or is it going to be known as an age when a dream died? Well, there are those who are working, some deliberately, and most just going along. They are working and destroying the American dream. And we are those who seek not only to save it, but to restore it to the greatness it once had. Can we do it? I say we can. I say we can because of the efforts of people in this room and tens of thousands like you all across the land, and the more tens of thousands that we are going to reach and have become members of our John Birch Society. Let's make this period in which we live, let it be known as not an age when a dream died, but as an age when it had a rebirth, so that men and women throughout the earth again can look to America as their ideal, the bastion of liberty, the land of the free, the home of the brave. That's the dream that I have. I believe it's the dream of most of you, if not all of you in this room, and certainly it's the dream of many that we will be reaching with television. And so I thank you all for listening. I say God bless you. I wish you the very best for a happy and holy Christmas and a very prosperous and productive new year. Let's get busy or busier to restore the American dream. And let's have all of those who would not ask why we're still in business, but ask instead how they can help. Thank you very much.